First of all, thank you very much to the African Development Bank for hosting such an interesting discussion on the topic. We've heard a lot already this morning, and we've heard it. Peace benefits everyone. I think that much is obviously not a question, and we cannot look at development without looking at rising risk security concerns. And the problem is with rising security concerns come rising security expenditures, and it's obviously taking much needed resources away from investments in the social and economic sector. We've heard lots of statistics already, but that's one that resonates with me very much that was mentioned earlier today, is that 85% of the African population is still at the moment living in a country affected by conflict or a neighboring country. This is too high. I think we all agree on that. However, what we're going to discuss today is not about increasing humanitarian assistance or humanitarian aid. What we want to discuss is how to channel more resources from different actors, the international community, the private sector, and make it a scalable long-term investment for peace. And this is why we need to tackle it with innovative ways. And I guess we've also heard about a new initiative from the African Development Bank. Perhaps there's even a new asset class that we can promote today to make sure that these resources are channeled in the appropriate ways. So we will talk about, obviously, the international community, the private sector, a new asset class. We obviously want to hear from people on the ground on what is needed. And beyond the security development nexus that we've talked about this morning, I think one of the aspects that perhaps is the topic of discussion now is the security development capital markets nexus. How do we make sure that there is more capital from new actors are channeled in the right way? Just perhaps quick introduction on myself. My name is Maud Lemoine. I'm a managing director at Lions Head Global Partners. We are an independent financial advisor with a particular focus on development finance, and throughout its history has been very active in Africa specifically. And in fact, we have worked with the Federal Republic of Germany in the past, and in partnership with the UN Peace Building Support Office, and very much with the African Development Bank on new innovative ways of financing for these topics. I'll introduce my esteemed panelists today quickly, and then we'll start with questions. I would like to mention that the audience that's online can submit questions if they want to. We'll take questions at the end from the audience here, also from the online community that's listening to us. Please submit it in the online form, and they will pass on the question to me. So first, to my left, Ambassador Nuhu, you are the Executive Secretary of the Lake Chad Basin Commission. Can we please start with you to discuss what you're seeing on the ground? You're obviously overseeing LCBC's mission to ensure equitable management of Lake Chad. This is a major transboundary water resource. It can lead to, obviously, managing water resources anywhere can lead to major source of conflict. Can you please give us a little bit of a sense of LCBC's mission and the challenges that you are facing?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me say a very big thank you to the Africa Development Bank, not only for inviting the Lake Chad Basin Commission to this very important conference, but also for giving us the opportunity to say a word or two about the Lake Chad Basin Commission, its challenges, and its mission. As you said, we have a three-point mission to manage the waters of the lake and other transboundary waters of the basin in an equitable and sustainable way, to protect the ecosystem, and then thirdly, to promote regional integration, peace, and security. Those are the mandates of the Lake Chad Basin Commission. Now, before we go deeper, I think it will be useful to give a background to situate the Lake Chad Basin Commission, our operational background. What are the challenges that we are facing in the process of implementing our mandate? I'm sure you are aware of the fact that the Lake Chad area is the least developed area among the 4 riparian states. Now, if you look at the riparian states, and you look at the Human Development Index, they are at the bottom of it. So there is already development challenges in the Lake Chad area historically. I don't want to call it absence of governance because government is there, but it's just that the resources are not there to do the kind of development that we are supposed to be doing. Then again, this background, we also have a population explosion. We have one of the highest birth rates in the world. And then again, in spite of all the problems that I'm going to enumerate here, Lake Chad Basin still remains a magnet, attracting migrants from the drier part of the Sahel. So when we started in the 1960s, around 1963, with a population of about 7 million, now we have about 45 million. So that is another factor. Then another issue that you have to bear in mind is the fact that climate change has negatively impacted on the Lake Chad Basin. The Sahara Desert is encroaching at the rate of 600 meters annually. In the course of that encroachment, villages are displaced, farmlands are lost, and people now migrate to the lake area. Associated with the desert encroachment, with the climate change, is the soil degradation, which has now created a situation of dwindling yield from the farms. Agriculture is no longer as it used to be. If you also look at the fact that traditionally the people of the Lake Chad Basin are either farmers or fishermen or livestock herders, and then they engage in trade in these commodities. Now, when you have a situation of desert encroachment, degrading soil, that means loss of pastures for the farmers. That also means migration southwards by herders. Now that brings us to the next problem of farmer-herder clashes, because as they migrate due to shortage of pastures, they have to move through other people's farms because of the population explosion. What used to be cattle routes have now been taken over by villages, by farmlands, and that is now a recipe for disaster, the disaster that we are facing now, not only within the lake, but beyond. Now, we also have another situation which you have all heard about. We have a very high evaporation rate. Now, because of that, the Lake Chad itself shrunk. From a surface area of about 25,000 square kilometers in the 1960s, it shrank to 10,700 square kilometers after a bout of drought from 1972 to 1975. Then it shrank again to 1,410 square kilometers during another bout of drought between 1982 and 1985. Thus, it lost about 90% of its surface area. Now, look at this against the background of population explosion. Most of them are youth, with virtually nothing to do. And in addition to that, they are mostly not educated because of the shortage of this thing. They are not educated either in the form of Western education or Islamic education. Now that is a recipe for disaster. When Boko Haram ideology came, it already met an army of disgruntled by other forms of criminal activities. The priority now in the area, as you have asked, is to restore a situation of safety in the area, to create a safe and secure environment, which is a condition sine qua non for any other development in the area. You cannot develop an area without peace, and there cannot be peace without development. So the priority in the area now is to create and sustain a safe and secure environment. Then, along with that, we are also introducing, as you have been told by the UNDP representative, a regional strategy for stabilization, recovery, and resilience for the entire area that is affected by Boko Haram. Because the multinational joint task force which has been fighting Boko Haram has made a lot of successes. A lot of areas that were occupied by Boko Haram have now been released, but I cannot say that the challenges are over. No, they are still there. We still have pockets of attacks from marauding terrorists in desperate search for food, arms and ammunition, and things like that. And they have now moved to the islands of Lake Chad. That is now the base of this. So we really need to address that problem. We have to attract more funding for the multinational joint task force to enable it complete the assignment that it has already started. That is why we introduced the regional stabilization strategy with 9 pillars and 40 strategic objectives. It is so comprehensive that every partner that will want to intervene in the region, there is a window for him. When you look at the strategic objectives, there is enough space for everybody. We already have a number of projects that are addressing the RSS, like Africa Development Bank's socioeconomic reintegration of vulnerable groups in the Lake Chad Basin, Passebalt. Passebalt is addressing Pillar 6, which deals with socioeconomic recovery and environmental sustainability, and Pillar 7, which deals with education, learning, and skills. This education, learning, and skills actually addresses the issue of lack of skills among the youth. The World Bank has also taken up some of the challenges with a project called PROLAC, and it is addressing 6 of the 9 pillars. UNDP is the major implementer of the regional stabilization strategy. Actually, we conceived the strategy together with the UNDP, and they provided the skills for running the secretariat of the UNDP, and then secretariat of the RSS, and then the UNDP also introduced a facility, the Regional Stabilization Facility, which has been doing a fantastic work in the implementation of the Regional Stabilization strategy. Just last week, we had a board meeting of the facility in Abuja, and we are seeking to actually extend its lifespan so that, because you don't change a winning horse. Yeah. So the RSS, as I said, is all-encompassing. Let me use this opportunity to ask for partners that would want to intervene in the Lake Chad Basin area to please take a look at that document and find a window through which you can intervene. I want to stop at this point for more, if there are any questions or other interventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I guess it's very interesting to hear exactly what your needs are. And I'll just put Friedrich on the spot a little bit here. The African Development Bank should do something about it. So you've obviously been working to address long-term drivers of fragility. This is, your core business. However, we're talking about how much more needs to be done and how we can learn from what has already, some of the constructs, some of the investments that you've done. How can we leverage more partners to channel more resources into these issues? Can you perhaps address your thoughts on this?
No, thank you very much, first of all, to everyone for being here and discussing this topic with us, because for us this is a process of reflection, because what we have learned more than anything else is that we need to build effective partnerships around that agenda. Now, the African Development Bank has long recognized the complex dynamics around fragility and development on the continent. In fact, we have been the first multilateral development bank that came up with a strategy for addressing fragility and building resilience on the continent. And since then, this has been almost 20 years ago, we have continuously looked at how we can adapt our business model to have a greater impact on that agenda, and how we can also develop financial instruments for this agenda to mobilize more resources and then at the same time achieve a greater impact. I think that an example of what we have been doing in this context is that we have recognized that fragility is not limited to borders. This was some 10 years ago. For a long time, there was the concept of fragile states. It was treated as this is something specific to some countries. And while this was a useful entry point because it helped us understand also that these countries that basically experienced the greatest fragility were receiving less financial assistance than those that were more stable. So those more in need receive less. And this is why we have created the Transition Support Facility to provide supplemental resources for these countries. So this is something that we have done already 15 years ago to address deficiencies in resource allocation mechanisms within the system. Now, we've also learned in that process that it's not just about money. We need to make sure that these resources are well utilized. And this is what we do through what we call the application of a fragility and resilience lens. We need to understand the dynamics which are different in every context. The Lake Chad Basin is one example. What is driving conflict there? It's a combination of factors, but the environmental degradation, the climate change, this is the greater competition for ever more scarce resources is a very important element there. And so this is where we now make sure that all of our interventions are informed by this kind of fragility analysis. So this is what we have done over a long period, and now it is part and parcel of what we do. And not just in a particular group of countries, but in all countries. Because we know, particularly when you think of the challenges that we see with climate change, no country is immune to the challenges of fragility. And this, therefore, has for us always been our approach. At the same time, what we learned in that process was that it's not just about trying to address the drivers of fragility. You need to build resilience, you need to identify the sources of resilience. And these sources of resilience are very much linked to effective institutions. It is linked to promoting inclusiveness, working with the communities, with the people. And then what we also learned is that the private sector plays a critical role. 10 years ago, there was no discussion about the role of the private sector in these environments. Everybody said, what can the private sector do there? Now, this is different. We see initiatives that focus on private investments. They look directly at what can the private sector do. And that's why we integrated this also in our latest version of our strategy last year. We integrated a new dimension just focusing on catalyzing the private investor. Now, however, we also know that investments can actually exacerbate conflict dynamics if we are not careful. We have seen this time and again in the extractive industries. And this is actually the sector that, particularly in fragile environments, is the one that has received the greatest foreign direct investment. And this is why we work with these investors to make sure that their investment has positive spillovers. It benefits the local community and is not extractive in nature. Because this is something that we need to change. So this is therefore, it's therefore a combination of mobilizing more resources and understanding how to deploy them effectively. We've talked a lot about the conflict dynamics on the continent and the current trend that we see. 8-fold increase over 13 years. Now, if we continue on that trend, we have a big problem. So that's why we need solutions that address the needs of the people that are affected by the conflict already, and we need solutions that prevent a further spread of the conflict, because this is what we see right now in the Sahel, the risk of this spreading further. So that's why we continue to innovate also our transition support facility. We've introduced now what we call a prevention envelope, so that we can actually focus our resources on those communities that are then at the borders, so we prevent a spillover. Now, having done all of that and making the institution fit for purpose for this agenda was obviously not enough to change the overall trend that we have been witnessing. And this is why we need to continue to innovate. And this is why we have created the Security Indexed Investment Bonds Initiative. The focus of this initiative is very much on reaching scale. It's scale in terms of resources, it's scale in terms of impact. This is why we immediately approach it with the bond element in it. There's a reason for that. Because what we have noticed also is there are too many projects. The project-based delivery model has severe limitations when it comes to sustainability and scaling up impact. In the Sahel alone, there are more than 1,300 projects right now going on, worth more than 26 billion euros. This is in environments that are characterized by weak capacity. So weak capacity then is already weakened further in the national administrations because you need to staff project implementation units. And the time for impact by setting up new projects is something that we need to reduce because it takes too long. That's why we look for scale, we look to scale up what is working. And that is behind the Security Indexed Investment Bonds Initiative, Let us identify what works in the Lake Chad Basin. Instead of creating a new project, let us identify those ones that are working well, and we keep them working so that we do not have then a project that is in one area, because we know that there is one area and there is a limit and there's a community that wasn't selected for as a beneficiary, which can create problems. And then when a project comes to an end, even those that benefited from it, what comes next? Sustainability is key, because otherwise our efforts evaporate. And this is where we are thinking of it holistically now, through a partnership approach, but actually a different kind of partnership. It's an alliance. We don't want to create something where we do another project. We want to create a financing facility that scales up impact, so that when we see what is working in the Lake Chad Basin, we have the facility that can then finance the continuation of these important activities. This is why this is a call for action. It's a call to establish strategic partnerships. And it's so important that these initiatives are led from within the continent. This is also something that we have learned. There have been many, many initiatives targeting the continent, targeting this topic, driven from outside with the best intentions, and many of them over time, they somehow disappeared. So this is why this is an initiative that is led by the African Union, regional economic communities, the African Development Bank, jointly with all our partners.
Thank you. It's obviously a fascinating initiative. I just want to make sure that we hear from our international partners, because obviously it's a very interesting perspective as well.
And on the other hand, we do see that the donor capacity is not enough to meet the increasing needs worldwide. And we have heard a number of the problems out there and the rising complexity. And if you look at, I'll just give another number, in 2022, the world reached the sad record of 28-year high in conflict deaths. And against this background, really, we felt that we need to look differently of how to meet the needs. And apparently, the current system did not, or is not fit for purpose in that respect. So this is about making it fit for purpose, but this is also about shrinking the needs to bring in sort of a fruitful development before actually crisis hits. We are also heeding the calls by the UN Secretary General, who called for a more of a focus for sustainable financing for peace, and that is also one of the priorities in the new agenda for peace. So we feel that this is really something that is out there, and we need to get better at finding solutions for these problems. So we feel that we really need to unlock different sources from the private sector, from donor countries, but also from development actors as the IFIs and the DFIs. So last year, we hosted a conference in Berlin with the support of PBSO, the Peace Building Support Office of the UN, and Interpeace obviously also had a very huge role to play in this. And we brought together stakeholders from different backgrounds. So there was private business, there was DFIs, IFIs, there were political actors, obviously. And we based this conference, on a feasibility study of how peace-positive investment could work, but also on sort of a framework for, or a framework for a peace impact study, really to see when is an investment really peace positive. And I was actually surprised, and you were there, Scott, I was surprised to see that a lot of people did not see that not every investment is indeed positive, but that there are negative investments happening actually, and not so unregularly actually. So we had this fabulous study which was presented there, and I think that also once again showed people that it does make a difference how you do business, how you invest, with whom you invest, and what purposes and in what settings. And this is what we really are very passionate about. We want to make this happen, and this is why we didn't stand idly by over the last year, but we have really made more progress. I would like to thank also, first of all, Interpeace and the African Development Bank for also picking up the baton and going that way that now ended up in the MOU. And we are very much interested in the SIIB initiative that you just mentioned. That is wonderful. But we have also continued our work together with our partners from Interpeace to advance the conceptual framework, i.e. to really work out standards, as I said, for peace positive investment, so that then an investment that gets money really can tick the boxes. Yes, I'm doing a peace positive work. And we can see also from the private sector, and we were just talking about that, that there is more interest in an impact that their investment has, a positive impact, which they can then also portray to the world. They have done something good, and this is great. We need to tap into this. And we also have not only the conceptual framework, but we also make significant steps forward in terms of practical implementation. So we are working with PBSO and the United Nations Capital Development Fund on creating and establishing what we call the Peace Special Purpose Vehicle. So to invest money to bring in sort of blended financing, so donor countries pay in money, but then also IFIs, DFIs, and hopefully also the private sector. We want to create a foundation that is basically then responsible for issuing the money, and then also a vehicle, a financial vehicle that is giving loans for investments. Why do we do it? And I have to add, for particularly fragile contexts, right? So we really want to make a difference in particularly fragile situations and unstable and volatile surroundings. And we feel that this kind of blended financing might help business not to shy away from these fragile contexts, but to feel more secure that they will not lose all their money, basically, but that they feel comfortable in investing also in those very fragile settings, because this is where we need a future for people, this is where we need peace, this is where we need jobs, this is where we need sort of an economic growth for people in those settings. So we are hoping that more people will buy into this blended financing tool that we are creating. We have so far now a bilateral initial contribution of 12 million euros for that vehicle. This seems like quite an impressive amount of money, but we do need more. In order to attract more business and big business, we indeed need more. So a number of pledges have been made on this panel already, but I also want to make that pledge to spread the word and convince people that it's worthwhile trying. And I don't want to say that it's not possible we'll fail, but as I said, we are very passionate about this, and we hope that we can really make a difference on the ground. So do join in and help us get more support. And if I may end on a personal note, today we are celebrating the German National Day. 33 years ago, Germany was reunited, the two Germanys were reunited, and I just got a text message from a friend of mine this morning saying that it's a good day to remember to join in the effort and make, well, progress, and maybe the world here and there a better place for people because they deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting, what I'm hearing, you said framework, you said impact study, you were saying also obviously a special vehicle, peace financing, all this kind of resonates to me that we were in need of a new asset class of a peace bond framework, and obviously there has been new asset classes in capital markets created with green bonds, social bonds. It's taken, obviously now it's most issuers now have a framework in place, and it's channeled a lot of their resources into these activities. So perhaps this is something to take into account and to think of. Scott, obviously you were into Peace now at Peace Invest. When we're talking about investing for peace recently or earlier today, you were talking about demystifying the topic. I think it was very interesting. Why do you think it's needed? Why is that word important to you? And how do you think about your own risks in your investments?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Maud, and thank you to the African Development Bank for this invitation. Indeed, I left Interpeace after 23 years with them and 18 as their CEO in end of June, and I had, been so passionately involved in launching and conceptualizing this whole Finance for Peace thing, and which is now flourishing. And may I just point out that we have with us today Rosie Khanna. If you haven't met her, please come and meet her. She's the new executive director of Finance for Peace. So it's a great initiative that's going to be educating the markets on all of this. And I've now stepped away, and I've launched a firm, an investment firm, to give life to these ideas in practice. And the mission of Peace Invest is to harness finance to build a more peaceful world. And we are creating peace bonds. We're creating peace-enhancing investments on the ground. Now, before I talk about that, I want to demystify is a word. Yes, I want to talk about how we need to reframe some of the discussions we're having, I think, today and around this topic. First of all, I'm thrilled that the African Development Bank has chosen the word resilience for the primary name of this conference. Not fragility, but resilience. Why? It's because we are stuck in a trap of resilience in the way that we frame the issues that we're talking about. We look at Africa as a continent of problems, instead of seeing Africa as a continent of solutions. And I think that is the fundamental mental shift that we need to have, because as bad as it's gotten, eightfold increase in conflict, as our friend Frederick was saying, or the president was saying 85% of Africans live in a country or next to a country with conflict in it. Yes, all that's true, but even today, even with that, conflict is the exception. It's not the rule. It's the exception. So if you take, and we developed this so much over the years at Interpeace, we developed a resilience lens to look at societies and to understand the challenges that they face by first looking at what are their strengths. Asking the question, why isn't it worse? When you ask that question, all of a sudden, all sorts of things start to emerge. There are the social fabric of society that keeps things from going over the edge. The mechanisms, formal and informal, that are there, that we don't often look at or understand when we bring assistance to the society. So if you take a resilience lens to countries, and this is why I'm very excited about the work that we're doing, is because I'm only seeing great solutions that need to be scaled up. I'm not looking at this as a problem set that we have to resolve. I'm seeing solutions that are there and that are working outside of the limelight, perhaps, but that we can scale with the right private sector logic and business. And that's why, having moved from the international organization space to now the private sector, my mind is abuzz with all the different ways in which you can create efficient, virtuous circles of sustainability if you bring a business model into it where the actors themselves have a stake in it. As my dearest friend Assi was saying on the panel earlier, so much of this has to do with dignity. Dignity. When people are given the chance to actually drive the economic change in their lives, not get a job alone is not enough, as we've seen by working with young people in the streets of Abidjan or the gang members in El Salvador or wherever. Just getting a job is not enough. It's about young people in particular want a path of social ascension where they can rise in the esteem of their fellow citizens or friends. They want opportunity to grow and develop, not just a job. A job doesn't always do that. They certainly no longer want to work the fields, for example. There's a big evolution happening there. So we need to reframe the issues and understand that at the core of all the conflicts that I dealt with during my time at Interpeace, the core of the issue was inequality and exclusion. Without a doubt. Inequality and exclusion, political, social, or economic exclusion, is at the heart of almost every conflict that we can name today. So our role in this space is to create economies that bind people together, not tear them apart. Most investments extract value from society for the benefit of the investors or the project managers. They don't bring value and enhance value for the communities. And can I say, for young people in particular, what we've seen is that when we talk about preventing violent extremism, most of the time what we're actually talking about is preventing the violence of exclusion. Preventing the violence of exclusion. And that's where, if we address the issues of structural exclusion in society, especially for young people today, we can make a huge difference on these peace outcomes that we're looking for, even in a place that wouldn't label it as peace. Especially if you want to work in a preventative sense, they might not see, oh, we don't have the need for peace. Well, they have those structural issues in society, a broken social contract, et cetera. It's just as relevant. Thank you.
There's one question, okay.
My name is Marianne Jabang. I'm the Director of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment at the Ministry of Gender in the Gambia. So, of course, when we were coming here, we came with the intention of course, sharing our experiences as a country, which the Honorable Minister will be doing tomorrow, but also to learn. And from this panel, I got to learn a lot, especially looking at the Lake Chad Basin Commission. And my question will be directed to the Executive Secretary. Regarding, you mentioned some issues that I really thought of the gendered impacts of conflict within the Lake Chad Basin, looking at the issues and the strategies and policies that might be in place to address these gendered impacts, based on the fact that you mentioned the issue of violent extremism. The Boko Haram, for instance, which for us is a unique case, because when you look at violence in conflict zones in a broader context, as gender experts, we look at this as violence against women. But with violent extremism is a different case, because we see a case of interpersonal violence where women and you choose to be or be used to for example, engage in missions that demolish, for example, bombs that the violent extremists will use to send them to participate in these explosions. So it's quite a unique experience that I really wanted to ask what the Lake Chad Basin Commission is doing to address these gender impacts, if there's any, or is there any policies or strategies that are in place that specifically address the needs of women and youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very important question. Yes, indeed, the Chad Basin Commission is doing a lot to address the issue of gender. Gender is so important that we consider it within the regional stabilization strategy. We consider it as a cross-cutting pillar, and we have also created a dedicated pillar, Pillar 9, dealing with women empowerment and inclusion of women and children, because we have come to understand, and it has been confirmed several times, that women are, the impact of Boko Haram activity affects women more than any other agenda. They get kidnapped, they get married without their knowledge, they are transferred from one husband to another after their husband is dead, and coming back to their own society, there is stigma waiting for them. Ex-Boko Haram wife, their children are considered as Boko Haram children. So it is a real problem that we are trying to address in the Lake Chad Basin Commission through the regional stabilization strategy. It is one of those pillars that has not yet been taken up by any of our partners, but we are hoping that it will be taken soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And actually, I think this is a very interesting question also, because this is where we should really understand that we cannot isolate peace financing to any of the other sectors. It's really, there are gender bonds, there are climate. You mentioned the climate change was a very important factor in your region. Obviously, it's all linked. There shouldn't be a different way on a smaller scale to finance peace, really. It's just all part of the exact goal. If there are no further questions, I think we may need to wrap up exactly on time. Oh, sorry, one more.
Very quick one. Okay, so very quick one. Don't stand between us and lunch. But I think the moderator has already stolen what I wanted to say. I think all of these issues that have been mentioned are very, very, very much linked. My name is Sunita Pitambar. I'm from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Thank you to all the speakers for raising these very, very important issues. I think, as some of you know, the EBRD is focusing on private sector investments in the European countries to promote private sector development. Perhaps and the inequalities that exist, creating equality of opportunity, creating gender equality. I think these are all, and supporting human capital in these countries to continue to have peace, are all linked. Perhaps my question is to Frederick. I think this is a very, very interesting model, and I can see the potential for it to really make a big difference in the countries which are facing the risk of conflict and fragility, if I may still be able to use that once more. But I think what my curiosity is much more on how fast can we scale up this model, because private sector investment at the sector level, at the industry level, how fast is it scalable? How fast can we see it grow and build the private sector investments in those particular contexts? Because, as you mentioned, the risk of having done one investment and walking away is doing much more harm than really helping. So that was just a curiosity, if you can help me to understand better. Thank you.
Friedrich, may I just say something very briefly from my perspective? I'm sorry, because first of all, we need to wrap up, I'm told, but so we'll be brief. But one, just from a capital markets perspective, and I think this is interesting, I think how fast we can scale up is how fast we can put a robust framework in place. Because if there's a robust framework in place, then it will open the floodgates for investments. That's my personal banking experience, but I would love to hear Friedrich view as well.
Yeah, I think we need to bear in mind that what we are trying to do is really facing a long-term problem right now. And that in the most fragile environments, it's the informal economy that dominates. So we have to recognize that, and that we also therefore need to invest in business development. We need to start investing in the micro, small, and medium enterprises, so that then over the next 10 years, these ones will be able to grow. And this is why we're also working, for instance, with the World Economic Forum and the Humanitarian Resilience Investing Initiative, which will be discussed in the next session, which sets itself the target to scale 1,000 businesses in humanitarian contexts and brings together a community of private investors, of development finance institutions. So it's important that we think of this really as a general generational challenge. For too long, we have not worked with the micro and small and medium-sized enterprises. This has to change, and this is why we are at the bank working with the youth entrepreneurship investment banks to institutionalize that agenda, be forward-looking, and not just focus on what we can achieve within 2 or 3 years. Because if we have that short-term focus, we never get out of it. So I think that's why the part of it. Now, at the same time, we know also that there is the opportunity to work with the larger investors in these contexts more effectively, because there are private investments that take place, and that's why we work on business linkages, which are so critical, so that we really foster the domestic private sector. I think one last element in this is also to always bear in mind the importance of regional integration, and therefore also the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. We should not approach private investments on a country-by-country basis. It's a market, and the larger the market, the more you can grow, no? The easier it is for you to attract investments, basically. And that's why we have to constantly advance on that front. And just lastly, it's critical to work with local investors, build up the local investor capacity. That's why, because contextual knowledge is so critical. It's the ones, if you work in Nairobi, you know better about Somalia than if you sit outside the continent. So it is really there the investment locally that we need to mobilize, and everything from outside has to be catalytic in that process. And then that's why we also have the dedicated focus on women with AFAWA, because it's important. You need to directly focus on youth, directly focus on women in that process, and adopt a long-term view and working with all the partners around it.
Thank you. I think, Director General Botso, you had
4 sentences.
4 sentences.
On the gender issue. We introduced feminist foreign policy and feminist foreign development policy recently with this government, and we also introduced gender budgeting. And that means that 85% of the projects that we are funding must be gender sensitive, and another 8% must be gender transformative. And that means they have to sort of lead to a change in women's role, or vulnerable groups, right, role in society. So that is quite a target, but we are really working on it, and across the board for development and for what we are doing, like from foreign policy angle, this is what we are trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Ambassador Nuhu, I will let you close, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Okay, thank you. In just a few words, I would want to attest to the fact that the model or the project suggested by Frederick about scaling up what works instead of introducing new projects is working in the Lake Chad Basin Commission. And I am proud to say that the Lake Chad Basin Commission is Africa Development Bank's laboratory, where this strategy was tested and it has worked. We had a project for the development of Lake Chad, which we called ProDebalt. It was supposed to run for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, it was such a successful project, and I think even by UNDP standard considered as a huge success. It was extended by 2 years, and lessons learned from ProDebalt informed the establishment of its successor called PreDebalt, which addressed the issues of resilience. Now, PreDebalt was also supposed to last for 5 years. It is still running up to, it will end in December, which will make it 8 years. Already there is another project, PassAbelt, which has been introduced by the Africa Development Bank, and that one is also supposed to end in 2024. So it is a model that is working, and I want to attest to that fact. Thank you very much.
On this very positive note, thank you very much to the panelists for being part of this discussion. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.